Hey, what's up guys, welcome to the channel, and in today's video I've got for you guessed it, a few Reddit stories, and as always, make yourself nice and cozy and let's get into them. Enjoy.
If you see a snowman in the forest, leave immediately. Submitted by Iwan Alex Merlic.
I live in a small town in Romania. My retired neighbor, let's call him Pavel, used to be a high school history teacher back in the days. He told me a story about one of his trips in the woods back in the 80s, before the fall of the communist regime. I recorded it and told him that we should upload it somewhere. He agreed, as long as I won't give his identity away. So, with the exception of some names that I've changed, I wrote down an exact transcript of his story. Back in 1988, I was living in Brasov. I understand that some people might not be too familiar with our region, so I'll make it clear. It's a small city in southeastern Transylvania, in the Carpathians. It's only a short trip away from the Bran Castle. Many tourists may know it as Dracula's Castle. A beautiful place with a lot of history. Our teacher told us about it. We were planning to visit it together sometime, but we ended up doing something different. That year, on December 30th, some of my ex-classmates and I went for a 3-day trip in the woods. We were celebrating the 10 years that passed since we graduated high school. We were brought together by Mr. Dima, our history teacher. He didn't have any family, so he was very fond of his students and he always dedicated most of his time to teaching. Plenty of teachers then were pretty tough, but he was different. He was like a bigger brother to us. He knew how to turn any piece of history into an amazing story. And he'd always know what to say whenever any of us was troubled. So we were all excited to celebrate the new year by throwing a big party somewhere remote, with our favorite mentor. There were 7 of us. Mr. Dima, of course, our big brother who arranged everything. Then there were Vladimir, Paul, David, Emma, and Diana. Vladimir was the troublemaker that was usually the ringleader behind most of our shenanigans. Ironic to think that he became a prison guard. Paul and David were the 2 brothers and pranksters in our class. We've spent so many weekends at their place, since their dad had a VCR. You know, back in the 80s, plenty of American films were banned or censored, so you had to get your hands on tapes that were smuggled from the West. Not to mention that a VCR back then was so overpriced. It would usually cost as much as a car. Most of us didn't speak English too well, so we used to watch dubbed versions. There was this lady, Irina Margareta Nistor, that dubbed a couple thousand movies all by herself. Look her up if you don't believe me. It was so goofy watching Terminator and hearing her high-pitched voice dubbing Schwarzenegger's lines. But it had a charm of its own, you know. Where were we? Right, Paul and David. And then there was Emma, the fun and charming girl. You know, the kind of girl that all the boys had a crush on. Well, most of the boys anyways. She was the competitive one, always getting herself involved in any contest or project that was going on. Although personally, I was paying more attention to Diana. She was the reserved type, a little bit nerdy, a little bit of a hopeless romantic. She read a lot of novels and she had Mr. Dima's talent, being a great storyteller. I didn't tell her that I had a thing for her. Well, no point in crying about it now, is it? And of course, the last one in the party, me. They nicknamed me Mousy, due to a tooth I've lost back in the 10th grade. My obsessive interest in history didn't help either. Most of my colleagues became accountants, factory workers, or in Vladimir's case, a prison guard. So during this trip I was standing out as the new history teacher, the guy that may replace Mr. Dima at some point. Our teacher's brother-in-law was a forest ranger, so he knew about this log cabin somewhere up in the mountains. The place used to be a gathering point for forest rangers, and lost tourists could also spend the night there. As it turns out, the place had a decent supply of liquor and firewood, so any lost hitchhiker could seek refuge there. The rangers were pretty sure that nobody would turn up in the coming days, so they decided to rent us the cabin for a decent price. Of course, the whole thing was illegal and done behind the back of their chief, but it's not like he would ever find out. They were all probably going to get drunk and spend the days at the ranger's lodge far away from the cabin. It was a 4-hour walk through the frozen woods. We've lost half an hour or so going off the road since it was snowing like crazy, but the trip was sure worth it. We arrived at the 2-story cabin close to a narrow river. I think it was the one they called Valea Drăgovenilor. I'm not sure. It felt very welcoming. It had a nice view of the river and the little grove below. The main room had a long table with 12 seats. The walls were covered with all sorts of decorations and hunting trophies. It felt almost like the home of some Viking warrior. Well, a Viking with finer taste, that is. There were a lot of games lying around, an improvised pool table, and even one of those table football games. It was the first time we were seeing something like it. We didn't even know what it was. I guess we were more interested in all the liquor in the basement. After an hour or so, Mr. Dima sent Vladimir and I outside to gather some firewood. It looked like it would get very cold in the coming days, so we needed to stock up before we were struck by a snowstorm. As we were walking around the cabin, picking up twigs and branches, Vladimir couldn't keep it to himself and told me, "If I were you, I'd make sure I pick a bed that isn't too squeaky, if you know what I mean." "What are you on about?" I asked, even though I knew what he meant. "I don't know, you seem a little bit too curious about somebody in particular. You're imagining things. You haven't changed a bit. You still have a thing for Diana, don't you? What's it to you? Maybe I can help you out with this, maybe you can help me out as well." I should have known he was up to something. He wasn't the kind of guy to help you out without getting his reward, one way or another. He continued, "Well, Diana and Emma will probably want to share the same bedroom. You know how those two are. But if you manage to get Diana to spend the night with you, then Emma would need a new roommate." "Diana's engaged, you nitwit," I told him. "So what? It's a one-night thing, come on." "All the time you've spent around the prison turn..." I stopped, realizing that there was a weird silhouette nearby, watching us from behind trees. It was hard to see with all the snowfall, but there was something there, alright? Vladimir saw it too. "Who's there?" I asked. No response. We got closer. We were both armed with logs we found lying around. To our relief, we realized that we were spooked by a snowman. It didn't have a carrot. Its nose was just another twig, but otherwise, it looked just like another snowman, with a smiley face made out of pieces of coal. It was creepy, I have to admit. It was pretty close to the pathway on which we came, so we should have noticed it before. We've also noticed that it was wearing a grey hat, similar to the ones worn by the local rangers. We just presumed that Paul and David found the hat inside the cabin and were pulling a prank on us, as they always did back in high school. We returned to the cabin, and of course, when asked about it, they said that they don't know anything about the snowman. In the evening, we were having dinner together. Mr. Dima brought his old guitar, so we took turns, trying to play something. Of course, Vladimir took the chance to try and impress Emma. Always the charmer. Too bad that he was too drunk to play anything. A couple of hours later, most people were already going to sleep. Diana and I were the only ones left, sitting by the fireplace. Somewhere around 3 a.m., I woke up all of a sudden. Diana was sleeping next to me. It took me a second to realize that David woke me up. He looked a little worried. I asked him what's wrong. "Hey, so, have you guys seen Paul around?" he asked. "No, I've been sleeping until you woke me up," I answered, angry that he ruined my sleep. "Can we go have a look around? I'm getting worried." Just as David said that, the entrance door creaked open. Paul stepped in. He didn't seem to notice us or care about us. He just walked past us, going straight to bed. "David, if this was supposed to be another one of your stupid pranks," I mumbled, still half asleep. "No, wait, I didn't know he was outside," David answered, sounding very defensive. "I've just told him to get lost and to let me get some sleep, but no chance for that. Early in the morning, I get woken up again by David. He told me to follow him. We both went to his bedroom. Paul was not around. There was also something very weird on the bed. There was a puddle of water on the left side of the bed, and there was a bunch of twigs lying around on the bed and on the floor. And then some small pieces of black rocky thing. At first I thought it was cold, but after touching it, it felt cold and a little mushy. It wasn't hard enough to be cold. If this was one of Paul's pranks, I have to admit, it was a pretty good one, because we were creeped out. Still, I was expecting any minute that he'd just jump out from one of the windows and give us a heart attack. A couple of hours later, everybody woke up. After finding out that Paul's not around, and since it became pretty clear that David was honest, Mr. Dima told us to get ready. We would go out and look for him. Luckily, the cabin had what we needed for a situation like this. We'd split into 2 teams of 3 people. Each of us would get some length of rope and tie it around the steel pole just outside the cabin. The blizzard was getting pretty strong and we couldn't risk getting lost in the woods, so by carrying that rope, we'd easily find our way back. We only had a few 100 meters of rope each, but it had to do. Mr. Dima, Diana, and I headed east, just over the river, while David, Vladimir, and Emma went west. We took the hunting rifles in the attic. Vladimir had some experience with guns from his training as a prison guard, and Mr. Dima was in the army, so they knew what they were doing. While we were walking around the woods, Diana and I were trying to come up with all sorts of explanations for what happened. At the end of the day, there was still a chance that Paul was screwing with us. But still, we had to look for him. Maybe he was having a hangover and decided to have a walk around the area. We've also considered that Paul might be a sleepwalker and went out there while asleep. He did ignore us when he returned last night after all. While we were searching, we heard something echoing in the distance. It came from the western side of the forest. A deep and constant whistling sound, almost like the sound made by a large plane that passes by. It didn't make sense for a plane to fly around that forest, especially in that kind of weather. There was something off about it, but we didn't give it too much attention though we still had to find Paul. After another hour or so of searching, we headed back to the cabin. The other group didn't return yet. We could see that their rope was still dangling, so they were probably still searching, heading deeper into the forest. The three of us decided to sit by the fire to warm up for a while before heading into the forest for another search. Mr. Dima seemed more worried than ever. He was visibly shaken by Paul's disappearance. As we were sharing our thoughts, I brought up the snowman Vladimir and I saw by the river. Mr. Dima didn't seem too interested at first, simply shrugging it off as the creation of some tourist that probably spent the night in the cabin. That was until I mentioned the grey hat that it was wearing. He asked me to show him. We went all outside and we headed south, and after a short walk we found the snowman right where we've seen it the first time. Mr. Dima grabbed the grey hat, cleared it of its snow to inspect it, and after a short while I could see him growing visibly concerned. "This is Radu's hat," he said, his voice shaking anxiously. "Who?" I asked, even though I had a feeling that I'd better not know. "Radu. He was one of the rangers that was on shift these days. This is his hat. Maybe Paul or somebody found it inside the cabin," I tried for no reason. "No, Radu was on his shift yesterday. They don't leave their uniforms inside the cabin." As we were there, I felt the need to grab one of the pieces of coal placed on the snowman's face. I had an intuition about something, and sadly, I was right. The pieces of coal placed on the snowman's had the same mushy, soft feeling to them, like the ones we found in Paul's bed. I didn't tell the others, I just told them that we should find the other group immediately. As we returned to the cabin, we realized that the rope was no longer stretching, so that meant they must be returning. Nevertheless, we decided to follow the rope. We had to find them as quickly as possible. We were walking at a quick pace. Mr. Dima was leading us, pointing his rifle forward just in case. We agreed that as soon as we will get back to the cabin, we'll pack up and head to the nearest village and call the authorities. While we were heading west, Diana asked us if we've heard about the New Year's assassin. Of course we did. Back then there was a serial killer that had his nickname due to his modus operandi. Every year, on the night of December 31st, he killed a child in the city of Buzău, 3 hours away from Brașov. He started his murder spree in 1985, and every year on December 31st he would strike. The snowman, it just made sense to be the artwork of some crazed serial killer. But why would he show up here all of a sudden? As we were discussing this horrifying scenario, Mr. Dima stumbled, almost falling into the snow. He stepped on something in the snow. We've gathered around, trying to have a better look. After clearing some of the snow, it became clear what it was. A human, lying on the ground. And after we turned it around, we realized it was Emma. We checked her pulse. She was gone. Her eyes were blank and devoid of life, and her skin was pale. Pale, almost like the snow. And then I saw some aspect that horrified me. Looking at her hands, the tips of her fingers, they were rough looking and hard to the touch, almost like the bark of a tree. Diana started yelling, staring forward into the snowstorm. Mr. Dima jumped, his rifle aimed straight forward. There was something dead ahead, something in the distance, not too far away from us. Mr. Dima shouted, calling Vladimir and David, but he received no response. As we were looking forward, we realized what we were seeing. There, in the distance, were 2 snowmen. Not even fully taking in what we just saw, almost simultaneously the 3 of us started running towards the cabin. We had to get out of there fast. No time to think about it. We wanted to take some supplies and go, but then we decided it would be better to leave everything behind and just run towards the nearest ranger outpost. So we deviated from the original route and went south, on the pathway, not even stopping for a second, when we saw the cabin. We were running so quickly, I turned my head to see if anybody was following us and bumped into something, and I fell to the ground. I got up immediately. Looking down, I realized that it was the snowman I found yesterday. I've seen those pieces of coal from up close now, and it just clicked. I remembered one of my trips in the woods when my uncle got his left foot frozen and he eventually had to amputate it. Those weren't pieces of coal. They were lumps of human flesh, destroyed by frostbite. As we were descending down the mountain, we heard it again, the deep whistling noise. We didn't turn, we just kept going. After some time, I don't know, it felt like ages, we've reached one of those skiing spots. Nobody was around since the snowstorm forced them to close the shop. We didn't have time to equip skiing equipment, so we were looking for some sleighs. We saw a 2-person sleigh next to a wooden shed. Mr. Dima told me to grab that sleigh, take Diana and go. He said he'd find another sleigh in the shed or somewhere. Without realizing it, I said, I'm sorry. I didn't know why. I suppose I knew that this might be the last chance I have to talk to him. I got the sleigh in position and told Diana to get behind me. As she did, she had a look back and she started screaming loudly. I wanted to turn, but she grabbed my head and covered my eyes. I could also hear Mr. Dima screaming, and then I could feel the earth slipping below me. We were starting to drift downwards. I grabbed Diana's hands and removed them so I could see. As we were plunging through the snow, I heard a loud gunshot, and then the whistle again. But this time it was very loud and sharp. Then came another gunshot, and then the same whistle. I was drifting the sleigh left and right, trying to dodge the trees in our way, and then, before we knew it, we were launched way up in the air, and then I only remember everything fading to black. I woke up on January 2nd in a hospital room in Brasov. I was told by a medic that Diana and I suffered both head traumas. We were out cold for a couple of days. We told the police what happened, although I doubt they took us very seriously. In fact, I was worried they might have sent us to the sanatorium if we insisted too much. We were released from the hospital a week later. The police and the rangers combed the forest, but to this day, nobody managed to find our friends. I wish I had an explanation for you, but I don't. I don't understand anything that happened to me, and I don't have the strength to keep searching for an answer. I can only offer you a piece of advice. If you ever see snowmen in the forest, it would be better for you to leave, immediately. There will be one more thing. A few months after this terrible accident, Diana told me that the head trauma might have been a blessing in disguise for her. It made her forget some of the things she saw. She showed me a drawing of what she saw in the forest that day. You can describe it, but I ask you that you never show it to anyone, please. My neighbor handed me a piece of paper covered in pencil sketches. As requested, I won't post it here, but I will describe it. The figure in the drawing has a humanoid form, an approximate humanoid form, although it is rather emaciated, slim, and tall. 2 arms that are elongated and thin are stretching all the way down onto the ground. The torso looks bulkier, and, by the look of it, appears to be a mix of snow and tree branches. Overall, the legs and the arms appear somewhat interrupted, as if pieces of twigs and tree branches are floating around the torso, or they are mixed with snow and ice. And on top of the monstrosity, there is a head. It resembles the head of a woman, except some of its features appear upside down. The mouth appears to be above the eyeballs, which are 2 perfect white circles, and the hair is curly, unkempt, and raised all the way up. And all over its skin, on its arms, legs, torso, and head, the figure appears to be covered in small black circular shapes, like small blobs and moles.
Paris Catacombs, where life meets death. Submitted by Dreamer Cat Dragon.
I'm making this record as a warning to all who may come across it. Never attempt to enter the catacombs of Paris through secret passage that lies hidden beneath the streets of the city. Within those dark and winding tunnels, there is something inexplicable and evil that resides the forbidden tunnels lurking beneath the City of Light. First, I would like to point out that the people I will mention here have had their names changed with the intention of protecting their memories and their identities. I hope that my decision is understood and respected by all. With that in mind, I will now begin the account of my Paris catacomb experience that forever marked my life. Like any other young person my age, I was very adventurous and loved exploring unknown places, always looking for thrills and challenges. My parents were always strict with me, forbidding me to go places they considered inappropriate, like parties and going out with friends. I felt trapped, like I was being deprived of experiencing the outside world like other young people. which only fueled even more the desire to venture outside the limits imposed on me. Like any other young person my age, I became rebellious. I lied to my parents that I was going somewhere, but I was breaking into an abandoned house, or exploring some tunnel, or underground cave with my friends who shared the same interests. But that wasn't enough. I wanted to go further, see new things, and feel more of that butterflies in my stomach that only adventure can provide. That's why when my friend Zach called me and said he discovered the location on an unsealed sewer entrance to the catacombs of Paris, I was all for it. If you've never heard of this place or have only a brief acquaintance, the Paris catacombs are a gigantic underground network of tunnels and galleries that extend for about 300 kilometers under the city of Paris, France. The catacombs, originally built as quarries around the 18th century, were turned into public ossuaries in the late 18th century, and are currently visited by tourists as a historical and cultural attraction. The catacombs contain the remains of millions of Parisians who were moved there after the city's cemeteries closed. Due to their age and fragility, the catacombs have strict access rules to protect cultural heritage and the safety of visitors. In addition, the catacombs are a real underground labyrinth and it's not difficult to get lost in there. For these reasons, visits are highly regulated and controlled. Entering the Paris catacombs beyond the permitted areas for visitation was strictly prohibited. Violating this rule could result in fines and other legal penalties. I should have stopped there, but at the time, all my rebellious mind had in my head was everything forbidden tasted better. We called another friend, Sebastian, and started planning everything. When are we going? What would we take, and how would we not get lost? The last one was solved by Zach. We would use luminescent paints. And yes, when I look back I realize how stupid this all was from the start. I don't remember what lie I told my parents, but they believed it. And I was able to meet my two friends without any problem. Entering the catacombs of Paris through a secret entrance in the sewers was always going to be the adventure of a lifetime. I was very excited and looking forward to this adventure so different from the ones I've done before. Zach led the way. He took us down to the sewer where the entrance to the ossuary is said to be. It took us about 20 minutes to find that entrance, because Zach actually didn't know of a location at all. He just heard the rumor that there was an entrance here. The entrance was narrow and dark, with only a shaft of light coming in through the crack at the top. Zach was the first to enter, followed by me and Sebastian. We managed to smell the strong and unpleasant smell of sewage in our nostrils, but that didn't stop us from moving forward. It was then that we saw a steep staircase leading even deeper. We walked down the stairs cautiously, carefully watching each step we took. The sound of water running through the pipes echoed throughout the place. But that didn't bother me. After all, I was focused on finding something new. We arrived in a huge underground room with dirty, damp walls and a slippery floor. The flashlights we carried illuminated only a small part of the room, and the surrounding darkness made it even more frightening. At first I wasn't sure if we were entering the ossuary or if it was just one of the sewer corridors, but then our flashlight beams began to reveal a few bones here and there, until an entire walls adorned with bones and human skulls gave us a macabre welcome. As we made our way deeper into the catacombs, the air grew stale and musty. The damp walls seemed to close in around us, and the darkness was all-consuming. But instead of feeling afraid, we feel like those brave YouTubers with channels aimed at urban explorers who enter forbidden places like this. And that was amazing. The Paris catacomb was an incredible gallery of macabre art. It was impossible to deny the morbid beauty of that place. The walls were lined with stacked skulls and human bones, forming grotesque and frightening images. I couldn't help feeling that I was being watched through the hollow eyes of hundreds of skulls. I grabbed my cell phone and started filming around, capturing every detail of the historic structure until an eerie sound echoed through the dark tunnels. Everything was silent until Zach said, "Relax, you pussies, it must have been just a car passing overhead." He emphasized his statement by pointing to the ceiling above us. We relaxed after that. Zach's words made sense. We were somewhere under the city. There couldn't be anything here. The sound could only have come from the surface. As time went on, my earlier enthusiasm was turning into another feeling, which I refused to show to my friends, as I didn't want to tarnish my facade of a great and courageous adventurer. But I couldn't deny that little voice telling me something was wrong was getting louder. Filming Sebastian walking side by side to a wall full of piled up human bones as he said, "Look at this. This is so cool," helped me to recover a little. Until then, I noticed Zach enter a different corridor and move further and further away. "Zach, don't go wandering around aimlessly. You know it's easy to get lost around here." I shouted, but Zach just responded with his typical arrogance. Easy, Mom, I just want to take a look around these holes. Before you know, I'll be back. I rolled my eyes and continued filming Sebastian. I was used to Zach's habit of drifting away from the group and somehow never getting lost. It was from that point on that our adventure turned into a nightmare. Suddenly, Zach screamed from one of the hallways, causing me and Sebastian to turn around in alarm. I shouted his name and shined a flashlight on all the corridors entrances nearby, but I couldn't find him. Then sounds like bones creaking and clinking echo through the galleries, making my blood run cold. Zach, this isn't funny, you bastard, I yelled loud as I shined every entrances I could see, believing Zach was purposely trying to scare us. And then I realized that Sebastian was frozen, looking with eyes filled with utter terror in my direction, more specifically, behind me. And then I heard a low, inhuman snarl. Slow and terrified, I turned around. The flashlight shook in my hands, but I kept the grip as tight as I could to illuminate whatever was behind me. I had explored many unknown places in my life. I saw so many things, so many stories to tell, but never, I had never seen anything like it before. Before me was a creature that could only be described as something resembling a giant centipede, made up mostly of several bones with various widths and thicknesses, and what appeared to be exposed tendons and muscles. In place of its head was a massive human skull with large, sharp teeth stained red, whose origin I refused to believe. That gigantic thing moved slowly with its many twisted legs around us, staring at us with large, empty eye sockets as it rose with the front part of its long body until it surpassed our height and almost touched the ceiling. For a moment, we simply stared, unable to believe what we were seeing, until the grotesque creature released a high-pitched, screeching sound that made us shiver to the bone. I ran without looking back, trying to keep a strong and steady pace, following the luminous paint that Zach used to mark the way to the exit. But it was when he heard the creature's heavy footsteps and its jaws grinding that the adrenaline took over our body. I dropped the backpack to get rid of the weight, and Sebastian did the same. At some point in the panic, I lost my flashlight and cell phone too, but at that moment, material things didn't matter. Miraculously, I managed to make my escape to the exit, but when I looked back to see if that monster was still following me, I realized with horror that Sebastian was no longer behind me. I headed back to the entryway again, even though all my instincts told me not to. I screamed Sebastian's name as loud as my lungs would allow, but the darkness only answered me with silence. That experience changed me forever. I will never be the same fearless adventurer I was before. I managed to escape with my life, but the price I paid for my recklessness was high. I lost my best friends, and now I live with this bitter and deserved guilt for the rest of my life.
I stopped in a small town while making a delivery. I shouldn't have listened to their folk tales. Submitted by MK Matrix.
Every small town has their fair share of local legends. They don't really travel past the borders of the town, and most certainly never end up on the internet. Ironic, considering I'm writing this now, but the locals can tell them by heart. I've heard a lot of them in my time as a truck driver, but none of them actually held any truth to them, except for one, the story of the ghoul. I heard it when I was traveling through South Dakota. I had stopped driving for the night, as I was just too damn tired, and it was so humid out that my windshield started to fog up. I'd ended up in some tiny town called Abridge, about an hour from Custer and 3 hours from where I needed to drop my shipment. When I say it was tiny, I mean it. There were about 15 buildings total, most of them houses. The remainder were a sole restaurant with a bar attached, one church, and a gas station. I didn't exactly trust the restaurant's quality, but I was starving, so I figured that I'd at least sit at the bar and order some sliders, if they had them. The door jingled as I walked in, and a mostly empty dining room greeted me. There were 3 total people in the building, from what I saw. There was the bartender, a bald bearded man who immediately gave me a quizzical look. The only other person in the bar was a young woman who was drinking a labelless beer and didn't even turn her head to look at me when I sat down. I was clearly the outlier here. I wasn't exactly welcome, and I felt it. Still, I picked up a menu and tapped the beer I wanted. When I took my first sip, she finally spoke. "I haven't seen you before." Her voice was equal parts of rough and soothing. I was startled, but I pride myself on being polite, so I turned to face her and tried to make small talk. "I'm not from around here, just passing through." "I figured. What brings you in here?" The appetite of a fucking horse, that's what. I've been on the road for 11 hours. She giggled. She wasn't bad looking, but wasn't exactly my type either, so I hope she wouldn't confuse my jokes as flirting. You're funny. I turned away for a moment to signal for another beer, then looked back at her. I have my moments, at least. She looked at the bartender as he passed me my second pour and waited for him to take my order before she signaled him. Rico, should we do it? He grunted and walked into the kitchen. She seemed to take that as a yes and excitedly looked at me. We've got a tradition around here. Everyone who drinks at the bar has to tell a story. It's nothing crazy, but we only have 23 people living here, so we're always itching to hear something new. I'm not a very interesting person, all things considered. You'd think I had some crazy stories after traveling around the country, but I really never left the road long enough to see stuff like that. Still, I wanted to put on a good show, so I decided to tell them a story about the first time I saw the ocean. As I munched on my onion rings, I tried to make it as fantastical as possible, and admittedly embellished the details a bit. I never actually seen a killer whale before, but they didn't need to know that. By the looks of it, the woman was captivated with the story, and sat there the whole time with her chin in her hands and her bright eyes trained on me. I finished spinning my tail and turned back to face the bar, placing a 20 on the counter as a tip. I was about to say goodbye when the woman halted me, with a slight smirk on her face. You got a good speaking voice. Thanks for telling us your story. I want to tell you one too. I was dead tired, but my manners prevented me from refusing, so I smiled and signaled to her to continue. It's the same one I tell everyone who comes through here, because it's the one that sticks with you the longest. I nearly jumped out of my chair when the bartender finally spoke. It wasn't even directed at me, but it caught me off guard. The one about the ghoul again? Yes, sir, unless you got a better idea. He remained silent. She looked at me and began her story. The ghoul was a local ghost story about something that haunted people who passed through the town. It was a long, pale figure that would only speak one word at a time. It would start haunting someone once they heard its story, and wouldn't stop until they were dead. I sat there, relatively entertained as she described the ways that the ghoul would make people go missing, but I obviously wasn't buying it. But you wanna know how you can be sure that the ghoul is after you? How's that? It makes you see stuff, man. Stuff that isn't really there. It'll make you see it, feel like it's real. To me, this story just sounded like a bad drug trip, or an excuse to get me to stay in town. I was blinking in and out of consciousness when she finally finished, and decided I'd head back to the motel before she decided that the story time would continue. Well, I'm gonna call it a night. You folks have a good one. She stopped smiling, and just blankly stared at me. I got up and walked towards the door, pushing it open with my foot. Hey, one question before you go. I sighed and turned around. I just wanted to go to bed. Yeah, what's up? You can see me, right? I wasn't sure if I'd heard her wrong, but what I'd heard was a weird-ass question indeed. Who is us? Her and the bartender? Of course I could see them, they were right there. She was starting to creep me out. Yeah? She took a sip of her drink and looked at the bartender before turning back towards me. Well, good night. My brow furrowed, and I walked out the door. Whatever was going on with that woman, I wanted no part of it. She'd been pretty nice up to that point, too. I have no idea where all of that suddenly came from. I wasn't exactly in the mood to ponder it further, so I began walking down the street towards the motel. As I walked, I thought about the story she told me. Why was the story she told to people who passed through town? Some sort of scare you into staying tactic like I guessed, maybe? I wasn't sure. I unlocked the door to my room, and after brushing my teeth, tucked in for the night. I woke up to a knock at the door. I rubbed my eyes and groaned. I didn't feel well rested at all. I rolled over and grabbed my phone off the bedside table, squinting as the bright light hit my eyes. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. What someone could want at this hour, I had no idea, but I wasn't about to entertain it. I put my phone back and shut my eyes, hoping that whoever was there would go away. The second knock jolted out whatever grogginess I had left in my system. It was much louder than the last one, like someone had slapped their palm of their hand onto the door. I jumped out of the bed and laid on the floor, hoping that they wouldn't try the handle. I had to get to the door and lay against it. Whatever unsavory character was trying to open it, it was still pounding. I didn't have the confidence that the shitty motel door would hold. I crawled on my hands and knees to the other side of the room, and as my bare back pressed against the cool, scratched wood, the pounding suddenly stopped. I was horrified that I would hear the handle turn, or feel the door give out from behind me after a kick, but none of that happened. Instead, I hear shuffling from behind the door, which gave way to a single word breaking the silence. Open. It was no louder than a whisper, but in the deafening silence, I heard it clearly. My heart sank, and I tried to process what I just heard. It didn't sound like anyone I knew, obviously, but it also didn't really sound either male or female. I tried my best not to move and held my breath. Please, open. Every hushed word pumped a dose of adrenaline directly into my system. Whoever was out there was either sincerely in need of help or trying to coax me to open the door so they could do God knows what. I had to stay put. If I went to grab my phone, I was afraid that the door would fly open and I have to face whoever it was. I sat there for what felt like hours. As I was starting to fall asleep again, much to my dismay, I heard footsteps walking away from the door. I inched away from the door as they got quieter and was almost at the bedside table when I looked up. The bedroom door, which was open before I went to bed, was now closed. I froze, unsure of what to do. When the pounding started from the other side of the door, I shot up, grabbed my phone and keys, and sprinted towards the bedroom door. As I flung the door open, I heard heavy footsteps not far behind me, along with the familiar voice. No. It kept repeating it so calmly, following behind me. I bolted down the stairs, running through the parking lot towards my truck. As I jumped into the driver's seat, I felt something hit the door. I didn't want to turn. I didn't want to look. But I did. Standing outside of my door was a twisted face. The eyes were the size of baseballs and were peeled open, fixed directly on me. The mouth hung open as if the jaw couldn't close at all. It didn't have a nose, or ears, or any features on its face. We sat looking at each other for what most likely seconds, but may as well have been eons. Without moving its gaping mouth, it spoke, "See me." By this point I'd pieced together what was happening, and jammed the keys into the ignition. I floored it onto the road and didn't breathe until the town was nothing but a faint light in the distance. I was exhausted and could barely keep my eyes open. I yawned and slapped myself on the cheek in an attempt to wake myself up, but could feel myself drifting off. But I was feeling something else too, a sense of dread right in the pit of my stomach. Taking my eyes off the road, I cautiously turned my head to the left. It was still there. Its head was directly centered in my window now, smiling at me. I swallowed the urge to scream and looked back at the road. It couldn't get in and couldn't affect me if I didn't look at it. But what it could do was talk, in its low, haunting voice, punctuated with guttural growling. "You see me." It repeated that for hours. I'd almost forgotten what silence was by the time the sun rose. As the dawn broke and the light began to fill my eyes once again, it went quiet, and the only sound of my tires traversing the bumpy road remained. I looked to the left and saw trees from my window. Nothing was blocking it anymore. I arrived in Dupree shortly after, and didn't even help the factory workers unload the shipment. I just sat there in the driver's seat, smoking a cigarette and thinking to myself. When someone knocked on my window, I nearly had a heart attack. It was this factory supervisor who I had called off to sign off on the product. "You doing okay?" A couple of my guys said you didn't look so hot. I cleared my throat and put my cigarette out in the ashtray. I looked over at him and managed a smile. "Yeah, I'm alright. Long night though, barely got any sleep. Had to leave at 3 a.m. 3 in the morning? How far away were you that you just now got here?" I opened the door and stepped out on the gravel holding my clipboard. It felt good to make a small talk after what I've been through. "I was up in Abridge, old little town for sure." "Abridge? Never heard of it." I looked at him, expecting him to be kidding me. His brow was furrowed and he looked concerned for me, if anything. I pulled out my phone and showed him my delivery tracking app, which had marked where I'd stopped for the night. "It's right about there." He looked away from the phone and at me, with serious concern on his face now. "I've been hunting out there. There's nothing but woods for miles."
I'm a 911 operator and some of our calls are strange. Submitted by HoboSam21.
I'm a 911 operator and our district is woefully underfunded for the amount of strange calls we receive. I don't enjoy my job, but opportunities are scarce and the call center was within walking distance of where I live. Calls range from normal things like domestic disputes and burglary to the not so normal, like shaved animals and structures not being where they should be, or being where they shouldn't. To show you what I mean, this is a call I had that I thought was going to be in the normal category. 11:52 p.m. The phone rang. I dropped my book and put the receiver to my ear. 911, what is your emergency? A small voice replied in a quiet time. I need a policeman to come. Hearing a child's voice on the line was an unwelcome surprise. Sure thing, dear. Can you tell me what is going on? I could hear unsteady breathing. As much as I wanted to, I knew better than to ask again. Finally, the little girl replied, a bad man is in my house. My heart dropped. I had police ready to roll within minutes. Okay, can you tell me where you are and if you are safe? I waited for her reply. She spoke in a quieter voice. I'm at my house. I'm hiding in my closet under my clothes. I think he hurt my mommy. The matter-of-fact way she spoke was heartbreaking. I got undressed from her and was told police would arrive in 5 minutes. The police are on their way. They will be there soon. Just stay quiet and stay on the phone, okay? We have a police radio set up in the call center. I turned it on and listened. Officer 1. Dispatch, we have arrived. The buildings look run down and vacant. Approaching the front. Front door is locked. Officer 2. Back door is also unlocked. Moving in. I could hear the creak of a door opening from my headset. They were in the right place. My heart beat hard, and I whispered into the mic. The police are there. Let them search the house. The girl giggled. I know. I sat frozen. Her reply was wrong. It made me feel queasy. I jumped as the police radio came to life. Officer 1. I've got a body here. It's a real mess. Either an animal attack or a psycho with a bladed weapon. Continuing my search for the girl. The girl's voice humming a nursery rhyme floated from my headset. I couldn't turn it off. I couldn't hang up. One of the officers cussed loudly. What the hell is that? There was a gunshot followed by screaming. So much screaming. Ripping fabric, screams of pain, and unidentifiable wet sounds flooded my ears. As fast as it began, it ended. All that remained was the humming. With tear-filled eyes, I looked over at my supervisor who had patched into my line. His face mirrored my own. Shock and disgust. I nearly fell out of my chair when the girl's voice spoke again. Thank you, she giggled once more. Heavy breathing was all I heard as I reached over and hit the disconnect button. My supervisor walked over to the map of our county. He took a red pin from the box and pressed it into the map. It joined 100 other red pins, each marking an address that we wouldn't send responders to. Regular calls were marked with green pins. Yellow pins were for anomalous calls, and red, as mentioned before, were reserved for places that we would not return to. The last call I shared was a bit heavy. Luckily, we don't get ones like that super often. Yes, our map has a lot of red, but that's decades of records. And yeah, red calls have increased exponentially the last couple of years. But things aren't always so dark here at Greenbeer 911. I was nearly at the end of my night shift when the phone lit up. I put on my headset and hit the button. Greenbeer 911, how can I assist you? The voice on the other end belonged to a woman, likely middle-aged and very annoyed. I need an officer here with a gun. Ma'am, are you in danger? Can you give me a location? The caller sighed obnoxiously. Would I be calling if I didn't need you? Stop wasting time and send an officer. Her voice got shrill enough at the end to make me wince. My supervisor noticed and gave me the all good signal, and I gave him 2 thumbs up. Of course, ma'am, could you give me an address or crossroad? She growled into the phone. You waste my taxi on stupid stuff, but you can't track my call? Fine. Corner of Grover and Turned. I thanked her and asked for any details. She replied back loudly. There is a moose in my bathtub. I go to take my morning shower and there is a freaking moose standing in my tub. I wasn't sure what to say. I had expected a noise complaint or report of a suspicious person, not a wild animal. I typed the info into the computer and sent it to the police dispatch. Not a minute later, my personal phone lit up with a text. Yo, Kyle, you mean to say moose? Andrew was dispatching tonight. I confirmed that I indeed mean a moose. That's whack. I let the officers know. 20 minutes later, I was listening to the entire fiasco on the police radio. Animal control managed to tranquilize the animal only to find out it didn't fit through the door. So they ended up removing an exterior wall. Using a reach forklift, they lifted the poor animal out of the bathtub, but in the process it woke up and tore free from its bitings. The moose fell to the ground but appeared unharmed as it ran into the woods. As to how it got there, your guess is as good as mine. Night shift is a different game altogether. It's like people shut off their brains once the sun goes down. It's hard to find people willing to pull graveyard, partially because of craziness, mostly because of Jordan. Jordan isn't local, most of us working the call center. He used to be a big shot editor for some East Coast newspaper before getting fired and moving to little old Greenbrier. Rumors flowed through the office as to why he got fired, none of them very flattering. But Jordan brought that upon himself. He was an ass. Show up 5 minutes late, expect to be written up. Miss a detail on a call, write up. Someone calls back to complain about you, you guessed it, a write-up. I'm a pretty quiet person that tends to stick to doing my job while on duty. I think that's the main reason Jordan doesn't bother me. I would still prefer day shift, but since I got an extra $1 an hour working night shifts and can get along with the night shift supervisor, I often find myself taking more night shifts than most. I received a call on one of my night shifts that still bothers me today. It had been a peaceful night. I had a single call earlier about a raccoon stealing garbage cans and hiding them in the woods. Animal Patrol had their hands full dealing with the 37-pound animal, but no one was harmed and the trash cans were returned to their owners. 5:02 a.m. the phone rang. Greenbrier 911, what's your emergency? A male voice answered, his tone already frustrated. Hi, this is going to sound dumb, but I'm stuck in my house. Alright, sir, who am I speaking with, and are you in immediate danger? The man replied, James Oswald. No, I don't think so, it's just that I can't get out. Look, I just need someone to come open the door, okay? James, are you saying your door won't open? Have you tried your back door or a window? James' voice took on a bit of annoyance. Do you think I haven't already tried that? I've been stuck in here for a while and have tried everything short of breaking down a wall, okay? I need someone to come here and possibly break the door down. Okay, James, I'll have the fire department out there as soon as they can. What is your address? He seemed appeased. I got his address and forwarded it to the Greenbrier FD dispatch. I talked with James while he waited for help to arrive. He explained that he had tried kicking the door down but couldn't do it. He even tried the windows, but they are security glass and he couldn't break them either. I found it a little odd but didn't comment on it. 30 minutes later I got a message from the FD that they were on site. I heard their voices come on over the radio. Greenbrier Fire Department, is anybody home? There was no reply. They called out a few more times. Greenbrier Fire Department, can you hear us? Are you in need of assistance? Hello? James was quiet. I called out him through my headset. James, the fire department is at the front door. Can you hear them? I could hear James breathing, but it was irregular at this point. Feeling uneasy, I radioed the first responders. Hey guys, be aware, something feels off about this. I don't know what to tell you, there ain't a whole lot going on here. The house is abandoned, nobody's home, doesn't look like anybody has been for years. Front door was even unlocked. I could hear their footsteps echoing as he talked me through the radio. We're gonna do a quick check of the entire area, but we've got a busted open windows, unlocked doors, and enough dust to grow corn in. Feeling a little bit annoyed, I turned off the radio and focused on the headset. Okay, James, is this some sort of prank? I heard what sounded like a sniffle. And James' voice returned. Please don't hang up. Whatever you do, just please don't hang up. The desperation in his voice was real. I don't know if I'll be able to get through again. It's been so long. So damn long. I've tried calling every day. I tried calling, but no one ever answers. If they do answer, they can hear me and they hang up again. Please, just hear me out, okay? I didn't abandon my family. I didn't run away. God, they must be thinking the worst of me by now. I was just doing my job, okay? I was checking out the building. I'm a home inspector, it's what I do. I inspect places. I came in and no one was here, so I did my job. But I couldn't get out. I missed them. I don't know why I can't get out. His speech was fast and panicked. Hold on, James, are you claiming to be in the house? Yes, he shouted. I'm in the house, okay? I've been here for who knows how long. There's a phone on the wall. I try every day to call out, to get somebody to answer, to get somebody to show up and get me out of this hellhole. So I am begging you, please do not hang up. I haven't heard a voice in so long. I need to know. No, I need my family to know. I need them to know I didn't abandon them. My little boy needs his daddy. James was becoming frantic. My name is James Oswald. I'm a home inspector. I tried to cut in. James, I need you to, please, for the love of all that is holy, save me. His voice roared through my headset. I winced at the sudden increase in volume. He broke into sobs, punctuated by a few incoherent words. The voice of James Oswald began to fade into static. He made a few more pleas before the line went dead. I sat there trying to comprehend what I had just heard. Was it an elaborate prank or something so much worse? Jordan leaned back in his chair so as to look out of his office at me. "Kylie, don't forget to pin the call." He went back to whatever it was he was doing, as if the call we had just received was some mundane stuck cat in a tree request. Numbly I did as he said. I pressed a yellow pin into the address the call had claimed to come from. When I got home that night, I couldn't stop thinking about James. I had to know if there was any truth to his story. I googled his name and a plethora of results came up. Missing persons reports, news recordings of his distraught wife begging people to come forward with any information. I couldn't bring myself to watch the clip of James' 5-year-old son talking about his missing father. Just the thumbnail brought tears to my eyes. The sadness weighing the child down at such a young age. I considered contacting the family. I don't know what I would have told them, but I felt like they needed closure. They deserved something, but the most recent date was 1986. James's son would be older than me by now. No, it wouldn't be helpful. I closed my laptop. I wouldn't open up old wounds. I'm tired. I think I'm going to call it a night. So yeah guys, hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, leave a like, maybe even subscribe to show your support. And by the way, if you have an interesting story like this, make sure to leave it down in the comments, and if it's interesting enough, I'll even feature it in a future video. So have a good one. Peace.